Hello, today we're going to be taking a look at a limiting reactant problem as one of our stoichiometry types of problems. Limiting reactants are the reactants that get used up in a chemical reaction and they determine the amount of product. The other reactant would be the excess. The excess reactant has leftovers. You don't know from looking at how much of that you have, how much product you get because there's leftovers. They just didn't have enough of the other reactant to completely be reacted. So we're going to be considering aluminum and sulfur. So let's say we took some aluminum powder and reacted it with some sulfur and somehow got it to ignite. It would be a flash, and what would be left over would be aluminum sulfide. But if we have 5 grams of each, one will be used up, the other will be left over, and there'll be some product, and then some of the leftover will be just sort of sitting around as well. So the first thing to do always is to balance the chemical equation. Aluminum, sulfur becomes aluminum sulfide. We've got 2 aluminums, so we'll balance with that, and 3 sulfurs. So we've got a 2 to 3 ratio between the aluminum and the sulfur. Makes it kind of interesting. To do this, you start out with one of the reactants and figure out how much of the other reactant you would need to perfectly react it. So I'm going to do a grams-grams problem, starting with the aluminum, going to the sulfur. You could start with the sulfur and go to the aluminum, and you would come to the same conclusion. But I always like to start with the first one, just have it. So I've got 5 grams of aluminum, 5.00 grams of aluminum. With grams-grams problems, you always go to moles next. So 1 mole of aluminum, and for this I need my periodic table. And it says aluminum is 26.98 grams per mole. So I'll put my 26.98 grams of aluminum. So my grams of aluminum will cancel. Now I use the balanced equation. And it says 2 moles of aluminum will perfectly react with 3 moles of sulfur. So now my grams of aluminum cancel, my moles of aluminum cancel. I've got moles of sulfur. I want to find out how many grams of sulfur this would take, and then I'll compare it to this number to see if we have enough sulfur or too much sulfur. So I'll say that 1 mole of sulfur, and back to my periodic table, says it's 32.06 grams. So now my moles of sulfur will cancel, and in my calculator, I'm going to do 5 divided by 26.98 times 3 divided by 2, then times 32.06. And I get 8.91. I'm limited to 3 sig figs. So 8.91 grams of sulfur are needed to perfectly react with 5 grams of aluminum. So that's what I need. That's like the cost. What do I really have? I only have 5 grams. I only have 5 grams of sulfur. I don't have enough sulfur. I would need 5 or 8.91. I only have 5. So my sulfur, it's not enough. It's going to limit the problem. So sulfur is limited because my 5 grams were not enough. So that's usually the first question in these kind of problems. But really, what's more interesting is how much of the aluminum sulfide can we make? So let me rewrite this. And for B, I know that the sulfur is limiting. How much or how many grams of Al2S3 would we make? So you start with the limiting reactant. The limiting reactant is the one that gets used up and determines the amount of product. So I'll start with 5.00 grams of sulfur. The reason that I did that sample A problem was just to figure out which one was limiting, so I knew which one to start with. So my 5 grams of sulfur, I'm going to say 1 mole of sulfur was my 32.06 grams of sulfur. But now I want to figure out how many grams of Al2S3. So I'm going to say there's 3 moles of sulfur will produce 1 mole of the aluminum sulfide. So 3 moles of sulfur produces 1 mole of Al2S3. So my grams of sulfur are canceling, my moles of sulfur cancel. But now I've got to add this up because I want to know how much 1 mole of Al2S3 will weigh. So back to my periodic table, I'm going to do 2 aluminums. So in my calculator, I do 2 times 26.98, right? And that's 53.96. I've got 3 sulfurs, so I'm going to clear this and do 3 times 32.06, and that's 96.18. Add them up. Better to do it on the calculator. And I get 150.14 grams per 1 mole of Al2S3. So now I'll use that over here. And I'll say 150.14 grams of Al2S3 equals 1 mole. So now my moles of aluminum sulfide cancel out, and I'm ready to go. Because the question was, how many grams of Al2S3 would we make? And that's the unit that I have there. So we're set. So I'm going to say 5 divided by 32.06 divided by 3 times 150.14. And with my 3 sig figs, I get 7.81 grams of the Al2S3. So for limiting reactant equations or problems, usually the first step is a grams-grams problem to figure out which one is limiting. And then the second step is another grams-grams problem to figure out how much product you can get. I hope that helps. Enjoy your day.